Progress.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to part two of the mostly unknown history of Hanukkah with Beverly. A lot of eye-opening information for me last week, and I'm sure it was for you as well. Just one takeaway. It's really two takeaways that we're taking from last week's lecture is that we're going to hold questions till after the lecture. So write down your questions or make those mental notes. And the other takeaway was some from different sides of the room couldn't hear the questions that were being addressed. So what I'll do is I'll come up, I'll field the question, we'll present it to Beverly so everyone can hear it, or Beverly will just repeat the question. And I think that was really the meat and potatoes of last week's lecture, was in that little Q&A that we did after a lot of more information came about. So we'll do it in that kind of way. We'll let Beverly share, then we'll have the questions, all questions after, and we'll hopefully repeat those questions so everyone here in participation can enjoy. So without further ado, I bring to you Beverly. How's our screen? Perfect.
Yeah, screen's great. I'm about to take my jacket off. All right. Hi everyone. It's great to be here again. You can see I've got a tea and I've got a coffee. That's just because, in case I can't decide which one I want. No, I was at a wedding last night, and I think I spent much time on the dance floor, and with all the loud music, I was clearly talking too much, which I have, a tendency to do, and I have lost my voice a little bit. So, if you will just excuse this new voice that I have, I don't really recognize it on myself. That's why I have a tea and a coffee, because I might need to go through both of them. So tonight we're going to be talking predominantly about the rise and the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty. And notice there's a rise and there is a fall, and unfortunately, but this is what we're going to be spending time with tonight. I'll give a little rehash on last week, so that if anyone wasn't here, or if anyone wasn't concentrating, that I'll just sort of bring you back to this current time. And just to reiterate that we're talking about an era before the Common Era. Okay, we're talking about BCE. All right, and we sort of at that time living in the 100s. Okay, BCE. So we're talking in the time of the Second Temple. We did have a few questions last week where some people were confused about that. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows we're talking Second Temple time. Okay, and we are BCE time. And so just to go over a little bit about last week, just a quick summary. We have Alexander the Great coming into power and taking control of pretty much the whole known world from 336 BCE, and then entering Judea in around the year 323, and then we have the establishment. Unfortunately, he then passes away shortly afterwards, and so we have got the Greek Empire getting split into three different empires. The Seleucid up in the north by sort of what we'd call the Syrian Empire, which is the largest one, and then we've got the Ptolemies down in Egypt, and then there's also a few other ones sort of dotted around Greece. So Israel falls between the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic Empire, and so it's already going to be in a position of conflict. We know, because of this is just where it geographically sits. And then there's the rise of Hellenism, which we spoke about last week, which is this concept that came from the Greeks, with adoration of the body, of the mind, of science and mathematics and philosophy and logic, and Jews really took to this, and there's really a large amount of Jews becoming Hellenistic Jews, especially in the urban centers, whilst in the rural centers, the poorer or agrarian Jews were more inclined towards a traditional type of Judaism, whereas the urban center Jews became very Hellenistic and very pro-Greek. And then we have this battle really between the Hellenistic Jews and the more traditionalist Jews that culminates in a revolt, which is the Maccabean revolt, and that eventually lands up as what we know of as Chanukah, where the temple is rededicated, and the Hasmonean dynasty then come. That is really the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty. The temple's been rededicated, and those battles have been won by Yehuda HaMaccabee, and he was, other than his dad Matityahu, who's the one that started the whole revolt. Yehuda was really the gifted genius of all these battles, and they won and they were victorious, and it appears as though in the Chanukah story the Jews were victorious over the Greeks, which they were, but of course they were also victorious over the Hellenistic Jews. And so we have a new sort of faction developing here, where we have a new dynasty. This new family begin to take over as rulers of the Jewish people. They are Kohanim, so they're not actually supposed to be kings, but they become like the quasi-rulers of the Jews. Yehuda himself dies in 160 BCE in battle, and he is followed. There's sort of a period that follows after this with a little bit of like power struggles and turmoil, because people really glorified Yehuda, and once he was gone, it was like, well, like what do we do at this stage? Do we give in to the Greeks, or do we have this like little, maybe like kind of if they're not going to object to our religion anymore, maybe we should just sort of accept Greek rule, and as long as they don't persecute us for being Jewish, which is what had been happening.
While you take a drink,
Yeah.
I'm going to fix one thing.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
that's okay.
Giving your voice a much needed break.
That's good. I'll have my coffee in the interval.
There we go.
Oh, hang on. I can actually see myself, which is probably a bad thing.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Back to you.
Back to me. Okay. Again, where do we get our sources of information from? So the Talmud has very little on this period. There are archaeological sites which show us a little bit of information, but not really enough about this period. We do have coins, quite a lot of coins actually, from the Hasmonean period. We've got the writings of Josephus, which, as we said last week, were fairly problematic because Josephus was writing for a Roman audience, not necessarily for a Jewish audience. And most of the information that we're going to get for tonight's lecture is actually coming from the book of Maccabees, Maccabees 1 and 2. And that really is our closest source of information for what we have about the Hasmonean dynasty. Of course, as we're getting, from ancient times into more modern times in history, we start to get information that's coming from other sources other than Jewish sources. So during this time, we'll also have information from, coming from the Seleucid dynasty, or we'll have information coming from the Ptolemaic dynasty as well, where they've written down what's happened in some of these events, as well as Rome. So there are like other bits of information that are coming out at this stage, because there is just generally, more information coming from other points. Okay, now, so remember these are the 5 sons of Matityahu. We've got Yochanan, who was killed initially. Then we actually had Eleazar, who was killed. Remember, he was killed in a battle by an elephant. And then we have Yehuda, who is the main leader. And then he dies in 160 BCE. And he is actually followed by Yonatan. All right, now you can see next to their names, there's like a whole lot of Greek names actually next to it. And so whilst they have the Hebrew names, at that stage, people also had Greek names. So I just put the names in there just in case you ever see them called by those names. Okay, Judas Maccabeus sounds quite Greek. So Yonatan becomes the leader, and Yonatan, we're going to talk about each one of these sons. That all actually die in very unnatural ways. Either in battle they're killed, or they're killed by other people. So, okay, let's talk about Yonatan. So you can see that Yonatan actually ruled for quite a long time, 160 to 142 BCE. That's a whole lot longer than Yehuda. He was sort of 167 to 160. And Yonatan, we know of him as like the diplomat. Okay, he was a chief negotiator. So besides, so the Seleucids are still around. The Seleucids are around actually almost this entire period. And whilst it seems like we have this autonomous state, it's a very fragile autonomous state, and it's like an autonomous state within the Seleucid Empire. It's not just like its own functioning self. They're still paying taxes often to the Seleucid Empire. They're still having to give tribute to the empire. So they're kind of like running themselves like religiously and on some level, but they are still under the Seleucid Empire. Important to know that. It's not like today where there's like individual separate countries. All right, now Yonatan starts to cement the land area that Yehuda had taken. You see that little green area on the map? Yeah? Okay, so the green area on the map is that area of Judea that Yehuda had taken under Yehuda Maccabee and had cemented that as like his little mini autonomous Jewish state. And then the purple is what Yonatan takes. It's not like huge areas of land, but he really cements this area, and he does a lot of negotiating with the Seleucids, and he also becomes the high priest. Now, these are Kohanim, but they weren't the high priest before. Okay, that was another family called the Stokim, but he becomes the high priest. Okay, and this is now like 12 years after the miracle of Chanukah. He's now cemented this land, and things start to sort of develop like a normal country, and people are quite happy living under Yonatan. But remember, I told you that they're all like either killed in battle or they're killed by people. So everything's gone quite well with Yonatan, but then unfortunately a new Seleucid leader comes into power. And this is what happens. Every time there's like a new leader, you don't know if they're going to be, if they're going to accept your state or they're not, or are they going to attack you, or are they going to, or are they going to be with you or against you? You really don't know. And very often in the Seleucid Empire, there were different brothers vying for power and then someone else vying for power. So it was very, very unstable. Okay, so a new leader comes to the fore, and his name is Tryphon. And Tryphon decides to attack Yonatan, even though they have actually made some sort of truce. But he attacks him anyway, and he loses the battle. So Yonatan wins the battle, and the Hashmonaim are very happy. But then he calls Yonatan to the Akra to negotiate a settlement, and Yonatan goes to negotiate the settlement. And when he's there, he takes Yonatan hostage, and he says to his brother Shimon, I've taken him hostage, so you need to pay me a ransom for Yonatan. He's like the king, like not the king, but he's the ruler of this state. He's been taken hostage in his own land by a CHANUKAH general. Okay, and so it's hard to imagine, but you can actually imagine if you think ancient times, this sort of thing could happen. Shimon pays the ransom, and then unfortunately, Yonatan's remains get sent to Shimon. So that's what happens to Yonatan, this amazing diplomat. And now the reins pass to Shimon. Okay, now if you look at Shimon's reign, you'll see now that whole area that was before, that area that was green and pink. Okay, now that's now the green area, because now this is cemented area. This is land that now belongs to the Hasmonean dynasty, to the Jews. And Shimon gets another 2 little areas. But they're kind of very strategic areas, because you can see, if you look, the pink area on top is linking to the, and once you link to the coast, you can trade. So that's actually really, really, really important. Even though it's a small area, it's actually Yafo. So they're linked to the coast, they can trade, and Shimon, we know him as the wise. Okay, Shimon was an excellent ruler. He was skilled not only in battle, but he was skilled in negotiation. And he calls himself now not only the high priest, but he calls himself the Nasi. So the Nasi was always from the Davidic line, not from Aaron's line, okay, not from the priest's line. So actually there shouldn't have been a Nasi, but he calls himself Nasi now, which is like ruler. It's definitely not king, so he's not taking on kingship, but it's like head of the Jewish people, head of the state, but not the king, but head of the state. But also, he is still high priest, because the high priest is retained from his brother Yonatan. And Shimon fights this war, because now there's Tryphon he's got to fight against. So he fights a war against Tryphon, and he wins. And he consolidates this area to the coast, and everything's going very nicely. Only one problem. He's got children that are fighting with each other. Now, this is a general problem. Okay, it's a general problem, but this is a general problem in the Hasmoneans. Okay, their kids are not always good. So you could have a really good parent and really terrible children, but not all the children are terrible. The children are fighting amongst each other, and he has one daughter, and this daughter marries a man called Ptolemy. Now, this is not the Ptolemaic dynasty, so do not get confused, because I've done this talk before. It's a really hard talk to do, and I'll tell you why. The names are all kind of similar. The names are similar, and so you can 100% get confused, and by the end of this, if you're completely bamboozled, I will totally forgive you, because the names are really, really similar. So if you get confused at any stage, just put up your hand and don't ask me a question, but just say confused, and I will just reiterate. Okay, so do not get confused with names. Right. Now, he has a daughter that marries Ptolemy, but he's not just Ptolemy, he's Ptolemy ben Chavav. Okay, so he is a Jewish Ptolemy. Okay. As we know, they've all got Greek names, right? Okay, so Ptolemy ben Chavav is given as his wedding present Jericho. Now, you'd be quite happy if you were given Jericho as a wedding present, right? He's not happy with his wedding present. He wants everything. He doesn't want Jericho. So he's like offended because he got a city for a wedding present. This is not someone we should marry. But anyway, so he invites all the brothers and Shimon to a big banquet in Jericho, and Shimon's wife, his mother-in-law. And at the banquet, he kills everyone, except the mother-in-law. She's going to be held hostage. Only one problem. One brother's missing from the banquet. Yeah? One brother's missing from the banquet. He didn't go. He's still in Jerusalem. And this brother is called Yochanan. Now, do not get confused, because remember there was a Yochanan before, right? one of Shimon's brothers was Yochanan. But like all good Jewish people, they're calling their children after a deceased sibling here or parent. Okay, so Yochanan, we know of as John. Now, don't get confused. This is John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus, like the Greek sounding name. John. John is Yochanan, but John Hyrcanus is his name. Right. He is the one missing brother that doesn't go to the banquet. Now he's got a problem because his father was the ruler. He is the only remaining child. He's got a brother-in-law that clearly does not like the rest of the family, that has designs on the entire area. And he's got his mom currently in, being taken as a hostage in Jericho. So what do? Do you go to Jericho to get your mom, or do you carry on fighting a battle in Jerusalem? Because now you know that the whole, everything's going to come tumbling down. So he, like any good Jewish boy, he goes to get his mother. So he goes to get his mother, and whilst he goes to get his mom in Jericho, unfortunately, they decide to attack Jerusalem. So the Seleucids are going after Jerusalem, and there is a big battle currently happening. There's riots and he goes back to Jerusalem, and he actually, his mother gets killed. That is what happens. And things are not looking good at all for John Hyrcanus, at all. Now his mother's been killed. He's got he's about to lose pretty much his entire state. And he wasn't planning to be the ruler in the first place. But now he is. We're very smart. All of these Hasmoneans are very smart. They're not always good, but they are clever. So things start to happen in the Seleucid Empire. Now, when you've got such a gigantic empire as the Seleucid Empire, of course things are going to go wrong. There's going to be mutinies. There's going to be different people taking over. There's going to be wars. And so the Seleucid Empire is starting to break up a little bit at this point, and John Hyrcanus takes advantage of this. And so he starts making wars with the weakened Seleucids, and he starts to take land. Now, if you look at the green, that was the land before. And now if you look at the purple, it's big, right? Look how much bigger it was than that first tiny little bit of, It's he more than doubles the size of his territory. And so he does call himself the high priest. He's Yochanan HaKohen HaGadol. So he's the high priest, but he's not king, he's ruler. So he's Nasi, he's ruler, and he's the high priest. But he's also clearly very good at military tactics and at getting land. He's also a good negotiator. He's got everything. And things look like they're going very well. You can see he rules for a really long time. But when you start taking land, you start having some problems, because not everyone in the land that you take is going to like you, right? Okay. So he takes, you can see, large areas of the east of the Jordan. He takes that area up in the north, Samaria, with Shechem up north. And then he also takes the land down south. He takes Idumea. Now, the people living in Idumea were not Jewish, but he took that area anyway. Now, Idumea, the people living in Idumea were the Edomites. Who's Edom? The descendants of Esav. That's who is living down in Idumea, generally, because that's the area that Edom had. And so we've got these Idumeans who are not Jewish, but they're descendants of Esav. But he does something very, very, very interesting that, I don't think happened before, but it never happens really again. He blanket converts all the Idumeans. So he's like, well, if we're going to have a state, it's going to be a Jewish state. So everyone living there is going to be Jewish. And they never agreed to be converted to Judaism. They were forcibly converted to Judaism. Very unusual. We don't do this. And because we don't do this, the rabbis started getting very, very, very angry with John Hyrcanus. Now, remember why there was a revolt in the first place. Why Matityahu had a revolt in the first place was against the Hellenistic Jews and against Hellenism, and it was pro-traditional Judaism and pro the rabbis. So the Maccabeans, the Hasmoneans, were always allied with the rabbis. That's who they were allied with. But now, because of this big conversion, the rabbis start to object to these Hasmoneans. Because they say, first of all, you shouldn't really be the high priest. Secondly, you shouldn't really call yourself the ruler because you're not from the Davidic line. And now you've gone and done something really wrong by converting all the Idumeans, and you're not allowed to do that. So we're not so happy with you at all anymore. And so John Hyrcanus, rather than saying, look, I'm sorry, I've actually probably done this wrong, let me rethink what I've done, he doesn't do that. He starts aligning himself instead with another group called the Sadducees. Now we're going to talk now about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because this is very, very important for this whole entire period, and it will be important going all the way up to pretty much the destruction of the temple. Okay. The Sadducees come from the word, in Hebrew we call this Zadokim. They come from Zadok, who was the high priest family at the time, the family of Zadok. The Sadducees were running the temple, okay? And they started to have like quite different ideas about Judaism to what the traditionalists had. They'd said they don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in the oral Torah. So what we would call now like Mishnah Gemara, they didn't exist at that stage, but it was oral. So they said, no, we only believe in the written Torah. We don't believe in the oral Torah. We don't believe in the afterlife. The temple is very, very important to us. The temple is everything. It's all about sacrifices and the temple. And so it's a different sort of like kind of Judaism that then starts to emerge from what the traditionalists had been practicing. And because the Sadokim were the upper class, they were the ones that tended to have an alliance with whoever was ruling, because they also had an alliance with the Greeks. So the Sadokim were closely allied to Hellenistic Jews, to the Greeks, but they weren't Greeks, that was the Seleucid Empire, and now also to John Hyrcanus. So you can see who's like the nobility and who the rulers. And then we have another group called the Pharisees. In Hebrew we call them the Proshim, and that actually means like the opposition. They're like opposing or separating from the Hellenists. But they were like actually like the original group, but then they're calling themselves this word which means to separate themselves from the Hellenists. And they're what we know of as the rabbis. So when we think traditionally of like Hillel and Shammai and like those are the rabbis. Those were Prushim. Okay, those were Pharisees. So we think about it like as traditionalist Judaism compared to this other sort of entity which is like maybe temple worshipping Judaism. And nobility compared to the people. Okay, got it. All right. So now you've got John Hyrcanus that is aligning himself with the Sadokim, with the Sadducees. All right. And some opposition now from the Pharisees. And the Hasmoneans start to become a little bit unpopular with the people, because the people are with the Pharisees in general. They're not these like upper ruling classes. And the other bad thing he does is he enters into a much more formal alliance with Rome. Okay, so now he's got his foot in the door with the Zadokim. He's got his another foot. Okay, it doesn't have 3 feet, but he has in the door with the Seleucid Empire, and then an arm, let's call it, with Rome. And so it starts to be less like, imagine like Yehuda Maccabee, he was like really like a hero for the people, and now John Hyrcanus is sort of like not as much as, so when he passes away, like people are not like devastated that John Hyrcanus has passed away. And his wife was supposed to rule him afterwards, but now things just get much worse. You ready? You ready for these names? Okay, please be ready for these really hard names. Okay, keep your questions. Write them down. You need a paper. Okay. No confusion with names yet. We've had John Hyrcanus. We will have another John Hyrcanus. But this John Hyrcanus. Okay, next one. John Hyrcanus, after he passed away, actually planned for his wife to rule. But they had a very bad child. Ooh, that was the Sadducees and Pharisees. Missed that. Whoops. But you know everything from there. Okay. Bad child. Child called Yehuda Aristobulus. See, they have a Jewish name, Yehuda. Like, don't get confused, because this is not Yehuda Maccabee. Not at all, okay? This is Yehuda Aristobulus. And you can see that Yehuda Aristobulus did not rule for very long. 1 year. Look how much land he took in 1 year, like the whole of the Galilee. Because Yehuda Aristobulus was not just like he was a violent, warmongering guy. Okay, he was headstrong, power hungry, and he aligned himself with the Sadducees, of course. He was absolutely enamored with Hellenism. He really hated the Pharisees. He really loved Rome. I mean, this is all happening in 1 year. There was now civil violence. No one was happy. They really did not want him as their ruler, but he was the ruler anyway. He took all this land. But what did he do? Remember, his mother was supposed to rule? Okay, he imprisoned his mother. Not just his mother, he imprisons his mother and all his siblings, except for one that he really loves. I'm not even going to, his name was Antigonus, but like, don't get confused. Because there's Aristobulus and then Antigonus. So he loves this brother, but this brother gets killed. And so it's like all happening in 1 year. He does only one good thing, like one. He marries a really good woman. I don't know how she married him, but he did. He married a really, like probably, he married a really good woman, and her name was Shlomtzion. We know her as Shlomtzion Hamalka, and we'll see now why she becomes Hamalka, the queen. She's not yet the queen when she is married to Yehuda Aristobulus, because he is not the king. He is just a ruler, but only for 1 year. And it's like he marries this Shlomtzion, who was actually, believe it or not, the brother of her brother was Shimon ben Shetach, who was the head of the Pharisees. I don't know how this will happen. Plus, he liked the Sadducees. Maybe he thought like he'll have an alliance, or they'd have an alliance with the king, and then, or with the ruler, and then I don't know how. But anyway, he does marry her, and then he dies of a nasty disease. That's why he only lasts for 1 year. A lot happened in 1 year, but he dies. Now, what happens as soon as he dies is now who's ruling? His wife. Shlomtzion. This is good. But she can't rule for long, because you'll see why. Yeah, she can't rule, but she does lots of good things. She releases her mother-in-law and all the siblings, and now, of course, she hasn't got any children, so she must marry one of the siblings. And she marries this guy, Alexander Yanai, who we know as Janus, right, I'm just going to call him Alexander Yanai. Easier for me. You can see he rules for quite a long time. And he starts off like, okay, he is married to a very good woman now, and he is the brother that was not necessarily supposed to rule, but he actually is a really interesting character. Like, really, really interesting character. He is powerful, charismatic. He is like, imagine like a Greek ruler, not so much a Jewish ruler. Okay? He's like a really fierce warrior. Okay, look how much land he takes. That's a lot of land. Look, granted, he does rule for quite a long time, but he wins over quite a lot of land. But he decides, well, he's not just a high priest. I mean, like, how can these people be high priests? If you think about it, like, they're soldiers, they're warriors. Like, when you imagine the Kohen Gadol, do you not imagine like someone like pure and like working in the temple? It's hard to imagine, on Yom Kippur when you when you like imagining that whole service with the sacrifice, and you're imagining the Kohen Gadol and the wool turning white, and it's like this whole like pure ceremony. But these are now the high priests, and they're like warriors and soldiers, and they've done bad things, and it's like, anyway. And he was ruthless. Like this is like properly ruthless, but he's not evil like his other brother, but he's ruthless. Okay, so his agenda was just to get as much land as possible. He just wanted to expand the kingdom. Now, what was the Maccabees' idea in the beginning? I want you to keep on going back to that. Think about why they were there. What was the whole revolt about in the beginning? It was to keep Judaism alive, right? Judaism was banned. It was to keep Judaism alive, but like they've forgotten it by now. And it's all about increasing the size of the state. They've really forgotten what their aim was in the first place. So they've become like literally like any other kingdom, if you think about it. Not necessarily a Jewish kingdom. So now he's not so happy with just being ruler. He doesn't want to be like the Nasi and the high priest. He is the king. So this is the first time then we have a Hasmonean actual king. So he is King Alexander and I. Ever heard of King Alexander and I? No. Right? And his wife is Queen Shlom Tzion Amalka. Yeah, she's Queen Shlom Tzion. And his agenda, conquest and war. So it's the first 15 years of his reign are like just endless wars. You need endless wars to get that amount of land. The Seleucid Empire is like coming to an end. Rome is now becoming more and more and more powerful, and he is like, he even goes to help Cleopatra defeat her own son, and then he takes all the 10 Greek cities, the Decapolis, and he's got like this strong economy. That's why I've got some money there. He's got like strong economy. It's like this is like a state, but like in terms of religion, and it's like a mess now. Okay, it's a big mess because the Jews are really not happy with him. There's lots of Jewish blood being spilled because every time he goes to war, he's taking Jewish soldiers. He's also enlisting some, Greek soldiers now also, and then they've got like higher positions. I'm going on to T. Higher positions in the army than some of the Jewish people. And he starts not to be so happy with the Pharisees. And not just aligning himself with the Saducean, the Sadducees, he starts to like sort of wage war on the Pharisees. Because the Pharisees, the Purushim, are opposing him. He's not happy with them. I will tell you what he does. In one incident, he nailed 800 Pharisees to crucifixes along the roadside outside Jerusalem and slew them in front of their families. He massacred 6,000 Jews in the temple courtyard. On Sukkot, there was a water libation, which was a ceremony that they always had on Sukkot, like a water pouring ceremony in the temple or just outside there. And what he did was, instead of pouring water on the altar, he poured water on his own feet. That was like saying, this custom, it's like ridiculous. I don't like it anymore. It's a Pharisee custom. I don't believe in it. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. And so what did the Jews in the courtyard do? They took the etrogim and they threw the etrogs at him. So anyway, he got all his temple guards to come, and literally 6,000 Jews were massacred that night by the king, by their own king. Then there was an open civil war that lasted 6 years. Like, how bad can it get? But it got worse. Interestingly enough, as he got older, like, he got a little bit wiser, and for the last 10 years of his life, he actually stopped waging war, and he started listening to his wife, maybe. I don't know, but he definitely became better, and the last 10 years of his life were kind of a good period. In this whole bad period, there was like 10 years which were fairly okay. He died in his army tent. Right, when he died, he left the kingdom to his wife. So she eventually becomes the queen. She is who we know as Shlomtziana Malka or Salome Alexandra. Do not get confused with other Salomes, because there are many other Salomes. This is not the Salomes you are thinking of. This is the Salome from the Hasmonean dynasty times, the wife of Alexander and I. And she rules for 10 years. And this is like the best 10 years in the entire Maccabean dynasty, because things actually are really good during her reign. She doesn't want extra land. She doesn't want extra territory. It just sort of solidifies the rule, basically. She brings the Proshim back in because, of course, who is her brother? Her brother, Shimon ben Shetach, is the head of the Proshim, head of the Pharisees. So, she gets the Pharisees ruling making all the rules for the Jewish people. She totally aligns herself with the Proshim. There's it's like a period of stability in the land. And she rules wisely and cautiously and minimally, which is a very good thing. There's only one other problem. She has bad children. She has really bad children. She has even worse children than before. She has, they're getting worse. Clearly discipline was getting worse, but she has two bad children. Anyway, she has actually one child who's not so bad. His name is John Hyrcanus the second. She sees John Hyrcanus as, like, he is the gentler, calmer, kinder, sweeter one. Super weak. Totally influenced. But she sees him as, like, high priest material. Because he's kind of good. He's not as, in that sort of vein compared to the other one. The other one is, should we give a name? Aristobulus. Remember, our Aristobulus the first was the bad king that lasted for 1 year. Okay? She calls her child Aristobulus. So Aristobulus number 2 is also like wild, crazy, wants the kingdom, like wants to rule, so she sees, like, she doesn't actually want either of them to rule, but she sees Hyrcanus possibly as like high priest and maybe like Aristobulus as maybe the ruler. But Hyrcanus probably would have just been okay being the high priest. He didn't necessarily want anything, but remember, and very influenced. Now, very important to know what now happens. Aristobulus sees himself as the ruler, Hyrcanus as the high priest. Hyrcanus is influenced by a man called Antipater. Are you suitably confused now? Antipater is an Idumean who was not supposed to have converted the Idumeans. John Hyrcanus, the number 1. Now, Antipater is an Idumean, converted Idumean. He is really powerful and really strong and very influential, and he has the ear of John Hyrcanus. So he basically says to John Hyrcanus, you should not be the high priest. You should be the king. Why is your brother the king? And John Hyrcanus says, maybe I should be the king. Yeah. And so there's a siege, and then like a pig gets thrown over. I mean, remember when there were pigs in the temple, right? pig gets thrown over the wall of Jerusalem whilst Hyrcanus is besieging. I mean, it's just like on another level, all of this. They've gone straight back to where they were before the Maccabees came in. Like, what happened? Okay. So anyway, they decide they're having this like big fight. There's like now proper civil war. Like, who goes for Hyrcanus? Who goes for Aristobulus? And they decide they're going to get their disputes sorted out. Who are they going to ask to sort out their disputes? Yes, the Romans. Who should you not ask to sort out your disputes? The Romans. Like, why would you do that? Anyway, they go up to the Romans, and who is the head, the general of the Romans at the time? None other than Pompey. Yeah, heard of him? So anyway, they go up to him, and they say to Pompey, you've got to settle this dispute. One of us needs to be the king. We don't know who's going to be the best king here, but we each are going to offer you this, and now we're going to offer you that, and then we're going to offer you that, and we're going to offer you that. So you decide who's going to be the king. So Pompey goes, that's easy. I'm the king. No, he doesn't. He says, well, look, I will decide which one. So he first chooses Aristobulus because like he looks like a natural king, right? Well, more so than Hyrcanus. But then Antipater gets in Pompey's ear and he goes, no, you know, if you choose Hyrcanus, choose Hyrcanus. Because you can tell him, you can influence him. You can tell Hyrcanus exactly what, he'll just do exactly what you tell him to do. So Pompey decides to go with John Hyrcanus. But who is actually ruling the place? Not John Hyrcanus. He's like weak. It's Antipater is actually ruling the place. And actually, who is ruling Antipater? Rome. Pompey. So now, pretty much all their autonomy gets lost. Rome takes over. And that's really the end of the Hasmonean dynasty, seriously, that quickly, because they sort of lose pretty much all their autonomy quite quickly. They have to pay taxes to Rome. Rome is now in charge. Like, they actually invited Rome in. It's not like Rome ever had to invade Judea. They actually got invited. They actually got invited into Judea. All right? And Rome's strong. Rome is not the Seleucid Empire. Rome is Rome.
Like in the piece of the mosque to the Jordanians.
Yeah, it's like well, we can't so like pick one of us. Oh, well, actually, you know, I mean, like, and they're asking, you know, the main rulers of the time. Rome is the new reality, as I've got here, and Julius Caesar comes in because I've got a picture of him as well. Julius Caesar comes into power briefly, and he actually quite likes Aristobulus, who has been imprisoned, by the way, in Rome. And he says to Aristobulus, you know, you can go back and you can take Judea. And it was actually quite a good time when Julius Caesar was around, but of course he was killed, assassinated, and so was Aristobulus. So that was, you know, a brief period of maybe okay, but otherwise Rome is now ruling. Rome is in charge, and the Jews now have to pay taxes to Rome, and Rome seriously taxes. Rome makes life very, very difficult for the Jews. And we know where this all leads. Who was a descendant of Antipater? So this guy is sort of like the last like Jewish ruler, but he's not really Jewish. He's Herod. Herod, yes, Herod. Crazy Herod. Herod, amazing builder. Like when you think of the land of Israel, like half this, like when you go to Israel now, it's like Herod built this, Herod built that, Herod built. So Herod sounds like he was amazing. Herod was crazy, delusional, paranoid, insane guy that literally killed his entire family. His claim to being part of the Hasmonean dynasty, because he's not, right? He's from Antipater. He's not a descendant of the Hasmoneans. He marries a woman called Miriam, and she is a descendant of John Hyrcanus. So she's like John Hyrcanus' second, like granddaughter. He marries her. And and so that's his claim to the Hasmonean dynasty. But he's not really a Hasmonean king because he is not a Hasmonean king. Rome is the reality. Rome rules, and we know where it goes from here, downhill, all the way till the destruction of the temple, which happens. So this has happened in 67 BCE, 66 BCE. Rome destroys the temple in 70 CE. Okay, so we have a period of time where Judaism is very, in a very precarious situation. There's lots of groups. We know now of the rabbis of Hillel and Shammai who are actually in Herod's time. And we think of the rabbis as like, it was like a glorious time there, but it wasn't. It was a toxic time, actually. They were the sort of the shining light out of this toxic time. But there was times where the Sadukim could have been what Judaism became. But it thank goodness it didn't. And I mean, at the time of the year zero, which wasn't a year actually, but at the time of that, we've got all different groups around, not just the Prushim and the Stokim, not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You've also got the Zealots then, they want to get rid of Rome, and then you've also got all these people hiding in caves in Qumran, and then you've got all these messiahs that are coming out of all the different groups. I mean, that was a really toxic time for Judaism. But at the same time, we've got like the greats of like the house of Hillel and Shammai coming out of this, and the beginning of that this whole incredible period of oral Torah, being sort of slowly started to be written down. But that's why they had to write it down eventually, because it would have got lost. The Jewish people were in a real big state of flux at this stage, and it could have literally gone anywhere. But we could speak for hours about this, which we're not going to. So I don't even know what the time is. Someone let me know. 8:30. Oh, okay. 1 hour. Great. So just to talk a little bit about where we came from last week to where we got to now. It's like disappointing. I told Ellie before, like, are you sure you want me to do a second talk? Because it's like, it's like just before Chanukah. And you want to go into Chanukah with this like glorious vision of the Hasmoneans. And it's hard after hearing what became of them. So we shouldn't lose sight of what they were standing for initially. They lost sight of what they stood for. But we shouldn't lose sight of what they were standing for at the time of Chanukah, because they were standing for religious freedom, and they were standing for Judaism, and they were standing for what we now have as Judaism. Had we gone down the other path, we wouldn't even be around at all anymore. If it was for the Sadukim, when the temple was destroyed, that would have been the end of Judaism. The Sadukim were all about the temple. We wouldn't have had anything if it wasn't for the Pharisees, for the Prushim, for the rabbis, and the oral law. We would have nothing. And so I wrote here, the Hasmoneans began their journey with pure intentions to rid Judea of Hellenism and restore authentic Judaism to the people, but they became power hungry. There was infighting, greed, war, and that ultimately brought an end to the dynasty. Hatred of fellow Jews became an accepted norm. They say that's what destroyed the Second Temple, but we could see how there was so much hatred among fellow Jews. And what could have been an era of peace and stability in the land turned into a bloody civil war, a war between brother and ultimately an invitation to Rome, which ultimately led to the destruction of the Second Temple and the beginning of a 2,000-year-long exile, an incredibly difficult, arduous, and painful journey that lay ahead for the Jewish people. Yeah. So where did they go wrong? Where did the Maccabees go wrong? Power went to their head. They became like any other secular ruling nation. We should be very careful not to do that as Jews. They forgot their mission completely. They forgot why they started in the first place. And it all became about land acquisition and power and gaining territory. It was political intrigue, and they thought they were above the law. And so when we're going into Chanukah on Sunday, let's go in thinking about the original mission of the Maccabees, and let's think about Chanukah, and let's think about the miracle of the lights, because we spoke about that last week, because the lights always stay, right? The lights are hope, and the lights are the miracle. We can't have the miracle as just the battles, because we can see where it led. So we should light our candles and think of the miracles that have happened, and the miracle that we actually are still here, like honestly, as a Jewish people. At the end of last week, because I know it's an hour, someone asked me just a few customs of Chanukah, like if we knew the history of some of those customs. I don't know. I'm happy to spend 1 second on it if anyone is interested. Do you want me to do it? Someone asked me about the history of Chanukah Geld. Yeah, it was the history of Chanukah Geld. And from everything that I could find on the history of Chanukah Geld, you might have a different take-up, because sometimes when you read different things, you get different information. So I can't say that this is like, pure historical record, but everything that I found on Chanukah Geld said it actually started in the 17th century. Like this is now like 17th century and 1600s. We jumped a lot of years since Chanukah happened in Poland, and it was a tradition on Chanukah to pay your teacher. So you would give money to your teacher. So the parents would give the kids money to give to their teachers on Chanukah.
So it wasn't charity.
So it wasn't charity; it was a gift to give to your teachers. But then apparently the children started saying, well, if the parents have got, like, if my teacher's having money, I also want some money. So then the parents gave some money to the kids, and then apparently the teenagers jumped on the bandwagon as well, and so it became like, giving Chanukah Geld.
Can I just say, all my life growing up in New York, going to yeshiva, it was the custom that we would all bring a check to our teachers.
There you go.
Chanukah.
There you go. So, okay, it's real.
We never knew what amount was inside that envelope.
Right.
But it was standard. Everyone in the class brought a check for their teacher.
Right, okay. On Chanukah. So there you go. That is evidence of this being true, and that probably originated then in 17th century
Well, I've been
Poland.
saying all my life that I've been saying the Chanukah Geld is the money to give to other people less fortunate than yourselves.
Right.
Why you're giving Geld.
Right, well, apparently that's not where the tradition came from, but that is a nice tradition. Why not have that one? But it's not presents. Presents come from something else that's at the same time as Chanukah. Where did the money, the Chanukah Geld in the form of chocolate come from? Yeah, I looked that one up too. So, yeah, elite. It started in America in the 20th century. There were some chocolate factories jumped on the bandwagon, and yeah, yeah. Different shapes of the Chanukiah. That's an interesting one. I mean, I'll tell you what I've got, and you might have much more on it than me. That Chabad used the shape that looks like this. Am I right? And that is from Rambam, who said that the Chanukiah looks like this. So if you see the vans driving around with, the Chabad vans from Chanukah, they're gonna look like that shape.
That goes back to the question: the menorah in the temple.
The menorah in the temple.
Round, or was it on an angle? And the Rambam says that it was on an angle. The source of that it was round comes from the Hellenists, from Rome, from the arch.
The Ark of Titus.
Titus,
Now,
which has round menorahs, but that wasn't the original. That's when they wanted to change the religion. So that's why that's what one of the sources said. That's why they changed it.
yeah. So that's
The original one was on an angle because it says that in Rashi also it says that, and the Rambam says that,
so that's
why
a.
the Chanukah menorah
And others would say that archaeologically on the Ark of Titus it looks like that. So that's what it looked like at the time. So that we're not we don't know exactly, but we can go with Rambam and with Rashi.
There were also other menorahs in the temple. Not there was a main menorah which was like that. Then there were other ones.
They were, yes, they were
No
probably
electricity, no
decorative
lights.
But no electricity. And those were
with the lights, with the lights.
Some people argue if you actually look at Titus's arch, in the lettering there it says Judea Kapta,
That's right.
which means Judea
It's
is captured.
captured.
And some people argue that how can you use an arch that was used as a symbol of Jewish captivity and destruction as a symbol of Jewish continuity? In other
Right.
words, how can you use that as a proof as to what the original menorah looked like? And the argument is that image of the slaves carrying the menorah, that could have been a menorah from someone's house.
Yeah,
It
it
could
could
have
have.
been a candelabra from the temple itself that was just used as a form of art or to give light. But the actual menorah, according to Rambam and Rashi, it was
Angled.
angled.
There you go. Oh yeah, the dreidel. Dreidel, interesting one. Again, you might have different. Different ideas. Originally, I always learned that the dreidel was like when people were learning Torah, because they weren't allowed to learn Torah during the time of Antiochus the fourth, and Antiochus Epiphanes in the Chanukah, the Antiochus of the Chanukah story. So people weren't allowed to learn Torah, so they looked like they were playing like a gambling game, and so if the soldiers came up to them and they said, what are you doing? And they'd say, oh, we're just playing a game, but they were actually hiding that they were actually learning Torah. So that was what I always learned. Where does the actual image of the dreidel come from? I'll tell you what I know, that in many European countries, but especially Germanic European countries in the Middle Ages, they had a dreidel, that exact toy thing like we have, and it had on it, we go Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there. So that's why we have the Nun, and then the Gimel, and then the Hey, and then the Shin. But they interestingly have on theirs an N for nicht, nothing, a G for ganz, for everything, an H for help, for half, and an S for stel arein, put it in. So and then we play the same game, because we say, oh, yeah. So they may, who got it from who, we don't know, because there were Jews for sure living in the Middle Ages in Germany. And
whether it's an actual dreidel or not, and the actual dreidel could have evolved throughout history, but there is a common theme throughout Jewish history
of hiding.
this concept of hiding. So on Lag BaOmer we have the bow and arrow, which again was they were out in the fields studying because they couldn't be in the houses of study.
Right.
And if they'd be caught, they'd have bow and arrows with them. They'd say, "Oh, we're practicing archery." So
Right.
it may not have necessarily been
yes,
dreidel
as we know the dreidel, but it was a toy.
Probably some kind of toy
or instrument, yeah.
They would play with when they say, "Why are you gathering here? Are you studying? Are you lecturing?"
Yeah.
And they'd say, "No,
No,
we're gambling."
we're just gambling. So yeah, and it may not have looked exactly how we see the dreidel. Other things that were interesting, do you put the Chanukiah outside? Do you put it inside? And the different traditions. I think it was actually in the Jewish News this last week. It was very interesting. Different customs have, different places have different customs. That there was one to hang it on a door. There was another, in Israel, in Jerusalem, you always see these little glass boxes with Chanukiahs in them. We have them in the windows. So different places and different kinds of Chanukiahs have different concepts. I think it was, I stand to be corrected, I think it was Aleppo that had an extra shamas. I was reading in there, as a thank you to the people of Aleppo who took the Jews in. And
if you go to some places in Europe till today, especially Eastern Europe, where there were those big building blocks that at some points would then be completely inhabited by Jewish people, you can still see today a place where an outdoor glass container
Right.
would hang, and they
Right.
because they put their
inside the containers.
inside. It would be outdoors, but if you know those Eastern European
Yeah,
buildings,
those
they kind of
grey-
face this inside
Yeah.
courtyard.
Yep.
So they're facing outdoors, but they're really just facing this.
Right.
So everyone would have their candles kind of outside of the house, facing into those courtyards.
Right,
You can
right.
still see
Amazing.
where those places where they are.
Amazing. Yeah. Great. Okay, excellent. So,
Just going back
questions.
To last week's discussion that you started with,
Yes.
when the Talmud starts with the story of Hanukkah, the Talmud says, my Hanukkah, what was the miracle of Hanukkah? Based on today's lesson, you can understand why they didn't focus on the victory of the war. Because where that led to is not the best, they kept it focused on the spiritual side
yeah.
of it, and that's what the whole Hanukkah